Hello, everybody. I was just waiting for that magic moment when we were going to hit 30 minutes past 1, or here in France at least. So we've got a fantastic conversation just about to begin. And before I introduce our guest, I just wanted to find out, did you know that every time you download an email, you're contributing to global warming? Every tweet, every webinar like this, search or checking of a web page, it creates pollution. Well, Gerry McGOVERN is with us. You can see him. He is a researcher and author of the renowned book, Worldwide Waste. Thank you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Very welcome, Isabel. Delighted to be here.
So a lot of people, I imagine, like me, didn't really realize that digital is not green. So why does digitalization come at such a high environmental cost?
Well, I think it's the electronics, it's the infrastructure, it's the devices to make a smartphone. A typical smartphone causes about 60 kg of CO2. To make a laptop causes about 300 kg of CO2. Electronics are very intense to manufacture. They require a lot of energy and a lot of materials. The materials in your smartphone, there could be 1,000 different materials. 16 of the 17 rare earth materials are probably in your smartphone or in your laptop. So electronics, the networks, the cloud, the cloud is on the ground. It's, mega football fields of servers, these computer servers. One computer server could cause between 1 and 2 tons of CO2 to manufacture. So the internet is the biggest machine by far ever made, and machines require energy both to make and to run, and ultimately to decommission and to recycle. So, if you've got your pen and paper, that's certainly a lot more environmentally friendly than, your screen. So, it is a myth we tell ourselves. We wouldn't have global warming if we didn't have technology. If we were walking around just with clubs and spades, we wouldn't have global warming. It's because of the use of technology that we have global warming. So, but technology always tells us is that they're going to save the world, but technology is what has created the mess that we're in, and we need to recognize that as well if we want to get out of it.
Well, let's put this into I guess even more stark terms, because I know that you've calculated in some respects the environmental costs of certain of our actions in terms of the number of trees that would need to be planted to offset that. Can you run through a few examples for us?
Yeah, so you were saying about email, and how much waste, how much CO2 does email create? Well, that really depends on how you calculate it. Do you calculate the time of writing the email? But basically, I did some calculations, and I looked at it. If you look at a typical tree, can deal with about 10 kg of CO2 a year. So a reasonably adult tree can deal with about 10 kg of CO2 on an annual basis. So I calculated that just to deal with spam, we don't send it, but criminals or whatever send, about 120 trillion spam a year.
Whoa.
Unimaginable numbers, right? So just to deal with spam, we'd have to plant almost 4 billion trees every year.
Now that's 123 trillion spam globally.
Globally. So every year we send maybe 300 to 400 billion physical letters, right? So because people are always saying, oh, it's much better than a letter, right? But we send 300 to 400 billion emails every day.
Yeah.
And 84% or 5% or some are actually spam. So the pure waste. So the amount of waste, and most emails, the other emails aren't opened, the open rate. So there's a huge quantity of stuff out there that doesn't even create value. Like only about 5% of data is actively managed. So which kind of indicates that the other 95% we either don't know it's there or we don't look after it. So we've this massive world of, killing trees or damaging the planet that actually has no value. It's either spam or, email attachments that are not being opened, or, you know, so there's this huge amount of activity going on that is actually zero value, but huge waste.
Yeah, so if we were just to wipe that out because it has zero value, people don't open their emails, it would actually be very good for the environment.
It would be, and nobody would notice it.
Yeah.
Nobody, like, you know, I remember I did a lot of work for Microsoft over the years, and somebody told me once that they had estimated they had 15 million pages on Microsoft.com, and 4 million of them had never been accessed. So it was like the population of Ireland of pages that nobody had ever looked at. And you're wondering, why are they there? Why did we go through all this energy? So there's a massive, you know, waste problem in digital. I'm not saying get rid of digital, but I'm saying, why are we so wasteful using these technologies, which have a significant impact on the planet to manufacture? So we should treat them very, very carefully, and they should be lasting us 10 years or 20 years. And most of them are just lasting us just 2 years. And most of what they're used for is to store waste. Like data centers are better called data dumps.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, and as you say, it's unnecessary, and that's what's so frustrating about it. Just to remind us, 123 trillion spam are sent each year.
Each year.
And how much? What was the environmental cost of that in terms of trees?
Well, I estimated about 3.6 billion trees would need to go to work if each one of them was sequestering about 10 kg of CO2.
Okay, so stop the spam for a start.
Stop the spam. But I did other overall calculations around email, unopened attachments, unlocked that we're talking somewhere in the region of 30 billion. Trees for all the other stuff that's either not used. Because the thing with spam is that spam usually gets caught early by the systems at the server level. So it doesn't have, and it's automated, you know. So an email that you write or I write has a significantly bigger impact because there's more energy required in the 2 or 3 minutes to write it. So spam has massive quantity, but per spam is not as impactful, but at an overall volume level is huge. But the other emails where you're sending a 10 megabyte, you know, attachment, that's horrible, you know. And the reason we're often sending those is because we've got terrible intranets or whatever, and nobody can find anything. So you always have to be sending attachments because there's too much data on the internet or too much, you know. So a lot of this stuff leads from bad behaviors of, you know, I can't organize my computer because there's too much on it. And now that I can't organize my computer, I keep sending attachments. So when you get into this spiral, you keep doing, you know, more negative behaviors.
Okay, well, look, I could talk about this all day, but there is so much to discuss. And particularly, let's bring it back to the theme of this year's e-commerce week, and that is data and digitalization for development. And it's extremely important. So in light of your findings when it comes to environmental costs of digitalization and data, how should development work be pursued? And obviously, this is a very broad question, but in broad strokes.
Yeah, I think, you know, we have to learn from the mistakes that we are making in the so-called rich countries, because our models here are really, really terrible. They're essentially waste models. So, you know, most of my career is involved in web design, designing websites and stuff connected. And web pages have gone from an average of 500 kilobyte, a half a megabyte, to about 5 or 6 megabytes in 15 years. Now, they've not got better. We could still design a brilliant website with about 500 or 600 kilobytes. So with the right design principles, we could create data environments which allow transfer of money or e-commerce or whatever with really good design that is much, much lighter. So I would say to, you know, countries that are, you know, really trying to get into the space and bring to train their people in skills of information organization and on being able to design with less. Designing with less data does not mean designing in any way worse. you can create the exact same web page that looks the exact same and performs the exact same, that's less than a megabyte in its total weight, versus a page that is identical and is 6 megabytes.
So why is that not happening anyway?
Well, because we're lazy, because cheap processing and cheap data, it requires more thought. So one of the things that makes up a web page is called CSS. It's a component. So what people do is they get a big package of CSS that's maybe 300 or 400 kilobytes, and they just throw it down. And then no matter what layout the page wants, it's in that package. But if you were a good designer, you'd say, well, I only need 15 KB of that for this page. So you have to go in and take out that. So what would you do when there's no cost? You just throw the 400 kilobyte down. So the page only needs 15. So we're always making these decisions of convenience, developer convenience, etc. It's easier to send a big block of stuff that can do everything than to actually choose the things that are really necessary. So we've just become lazy and sloppy because cheap processing. So if the page gets bigger and heavier, what in the rich what we do is we buy more processing. Okay. So it's like a high performance.
But here, when we talk in terms of then development, it's a chance to get it right.
Absolutely.
And is it cheaper? You say it's okay, we're lazy that we use these kind of methods that we've been using for years and years, but would it be cheaper to use less data ultimately?
Oh, totally. It'll be cheaper. If you've got less data and less energy, you can use older machines. Okay. Because if you've got a very heavy website, it tends to require a new machine or a new smartphone, because and also the poorer people are, the more expensive the data plans are. So data, there's no free data if you're a poor person. You're paying huge money per megabyte of data. And that's, why a lot of times they stay on WhatsApp or whatever, because WhatsApp has an all-you-can-eat plan because it sells them advertising. Most in poor countries, they're afraid to go out to the internet because the pages are so big and so heavy, they'll eat up their data plan. So if we can build skills around information architecture, design structure, designing with less data, we can create brilliant digital environments that are 100th the size that current digital environments are. So less data does not mean less quality. It often means more quality.
Well, that's a clear actionable step then. Just like revise the design, it costs less and it causes less environmental damage. Now, at the beginning of our conversation, we evoked the question of e-waste. Now, there is obviously a differentiation to be made between e-waste and then our lives, I guess, on the digital world when we're using emails and data centers and the cloud, the dark cloud that's hanging over us. So can you just briefly define what e-waste is for us?
Well, e-waste is your device when it dies, basically. It's your smartphone or your laptop. At a broader sense, it's anything with a plug. It's anything with a plug that you've thrown out. And if you've got a fridge or something like that, they're quite easy to recycle because they're large components and you can plug out, etc. But if you've got a smartphone or a laptop, it's much more difficult to recycle because they're very compressed in their components. And the more compressed components are, the harder it is to take one of them out and to reuse it. So a lot of e-waste, old phones, old laptops, screens, etc., they end up getting sent to poor countries where they're essentially often burned in open pits. So they get all the cabling and they set the cabling on fire to get the lead or the out of it to use it or whatever's going to be there, and that's going to poison the people around them. So they'll poison the water, and then they'll smash the tubes with hammers or stuff like that, and gas will come up. And these children, something like 18 million children, 13 million women, children as young as 5 years old, because they can pull the tiny wires out of the small devices. There's a whole horrible story of how e-waste, and the reason it
so Gerry, to interrupt you there, Gerry, so when we feel that we're recycling our e-waste, it could easily end up in these
a lot of it does.
Okay.
20%, less than 20% of e-waste is recycled around the world. And even what is recycled, we can only reclaim about 30% of the materials in the because of the design. So big tech have designed products that are impossible basically to properly recycle because they make more money out of them, because it's a planned obsolescence game. So a lot of what we think is being recycled actually ends up in Ghana or ends up in Pakistan or ends up in port. There's these ships, they call them ships of doom, and they're constantly traveling around trying to bribe a port owner to bring in e-waste to countries. And you know, they call the areas where they send the e-waste sacrifice zones. I mean, this is what the rich world does to the poor world. We've always been doing this, you know, century after, but we're still doing it today, even though we pretend otherwise in the process.
So these poorer countries, basically, it's a double whammy, because not only are they dealing with the effects of climate change and often on the forefront of that, they're also dealing with the stark impact of, well, this e-waste, which seems even more harmful from what you're saying.
Well, it is. I mean, this waste will last thousands of years. This is not going to decompose. I mean, this is not, the materials in this e-waste, many of them are forever materials. You know, so they're not going to disappear in the water system. And a lot of this as well, they're sold as secondhand products. So they're just about working, you know, so they're, oh, look, we're giving our secondhand products, computers to these countries, and they might get another year or two out of them in the so there's a whole, you know, industry that basically has grown up around the fact that we don't create recyclable digital products.
So the answer would be, and we were discussing this before we came live, really the one way out of this is making sure that these devices stay in the system, that we really do create a real circular economy over here. And that is about, in terms of advice to the people listening to us, buying reconditioned computers. But at the end of the life of that reconditioned computer, smartphone, you're often left with the conundrum. What do you do?
Well, I think it is about, you know, there's a big movement now that's proving quite successful called the right to repair movement, which is a kind of demanding repairable products. You know, big tech is not going to change to make too much money out of this model. It's up to us really to come together as societies and say, we want to buy stuff that is recyclable, that is fixable. Like 40 years ago, all electronics were recyclable. You could take practically everything out of an electronics device and reuse it to build something else in the process. It's not impossible to build it. It's just not as profitable to build these things. They don't make as much profit. So I think we can create a model over the next 10 or 20 years where there is no such thing as waste. Everything has to be reused, and we stop exporting waste. You know, in any sense of we export our plastic, you know, and everything. We dump all this stuff on poor countries, and it's going to poison their climates, you know, in their local climates. So make products that can be disassembled, that are modular. So there's a modularity in the components, which means that that component was used for this device, but I can now use it for another device in the product. This can be done. And if we're going to create a circular economy, like we dig out of the planet 100 billion tons of material every year.
Unbelievable. That's
unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know, we can't keep doing, like the mass of Mount Everest is 150 billion tons.
Yeah.
Like, so by 2050, we'll be digging out 170 billion tons. So by 2050, if we keep going the way we're going, we'll be digging out a Mount Everest every year. That we can't keep doing that.
Yeah, no, it's not sustainable. And look, let's bring this back then in terms of the developing world, because as we were saying, they're at the forefront and at the brunt of Western practices in terms of their waste. So in terms of their digitalization, where we're talking about design, better design, but what other best practices can they learn? Can these countries learn more, I suppose, at the beginning of this journey in terms of digitalization?
I think the best practices are human practices of information organization. So teaching kids about deleting stuff, about managing your email, about creating structures. Most employees in the West have no idea how to organize their computer. They've never been taught.
Why delete? Just out of interest, why should we delete?
Because every time you delete, you remove, the need to store.
Okay.
And so we took more photos in 2020 than in the entire 20th century. We took 1.4 trillion photos. Now, all of those are now at the moment, there's something like 9 or 10 trillion photos being stored in the cloud. That's why we've huge data centers. I mean, the data centers are growing because of the data. If we have less data, we'll need less data centers, we'll need less servers, we'll need less of the technology. So we can achieve, a good system that allows you to renew your driver's license, to do all the really important stuff with 100 the data. So if we have people who are skilled in these countries at knowing how to structure the process, and they can make it a 5-step process instead of a 15-step process, that will reduce the quantity of data, the quantity of energy, the quantity of processing. So
and that's the low-hanging fruit, isn't it? That is
that's the deep. That's really deep. Most people today don't invest in these. Instead, they buy new technologies in the West, or they buy more processing. So the skills of information architecture, of designing information environments, are skills that we don't need hugely expensive devices for, but we do need a lot of education. We need teachers, and we need mental models of how to structure and organize things. And I think these are skills that are not expensive technologically, but bring tremendous value to a society.
Is this happening anywhere in the world at the moment, this sort of education?
I don't see it a lot. I do see an entity. I think gov.uk. I think the UK government has been one of the pioneers in this sort of thinking. If you go to the gov.uk website, it's really slim. It's much, there's a great tool called Website Carbon Calculator, which checks out how much carbon is emitted every time you download a page. Now, if you download a gov.uk page, it's about 0.14 of a gram. Now, that's one of the lightest pages on the web. Most other pages would be about 1 gram, 2 grams, 3 grams. So the philosophy upon which actually gov.uk is built is a very progressive one. They're not trying to have huge, big images. They're really trying to solve problems rather than stroke egos or find the laziest, quickest way to do things. But generally, I've been in this for 25 years. There's less information architecture skills today than there was 20 years ago, because we all go, oh, AI is going to solve our problem. Oh, the search engine's going. We've given up on the skills of human. And because we've given up, the problem is 100 times bigger than it should be.
Okay, so don't give up on humans. We probably have the solutions, and in fact, we'll be the ones informing AI of those solutions. And
if we don't do if we don't solve this, AI will most definitely not solve that. AI will make training AI systems are extraordinarily energy intense. AI systems will eat the world for energy in 5 or 10 years. We'll have no lions left because we're building the AIs so that we can have a virtual experience of lions.
Well, that actually brings me on to one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, because, okay, let's look 10 years ahead with this more advanced tech, with AI, with the metaverse, with supercomputers. What kind of digital waste? Now, you're talking about kind of Mount Everest in terms of mining for the materials we needed, but what kind of digital waste and what kind of environmental impact would you foresee if we continue on our same trajectory?
An environmental Armageddon. I mean, we have seen nothing to what the Internet of Things, what, self-driving cars. I mean, a self-driving cars could be throwing gigabytes of data off every second because it has to have hundreds of sensors to know where it is. mean, these things are utterly scary. Think of your in the metaverse. Think of you having to maintain a you in the amount of energy that's required for that. These are, you know, what we need is less. What we need, the future is Paris, you know, bicycling, walking, if we want a future. You know, if we want a future, it's burn your own energy, get up, turn the light off yourself, stop using Alexa. I mean, we've got to radically, behavior change. Is the crucial savior of the human race, not technology change.
And, you know, when we talk about 10 years down the line, who's going to be the most impacted in terms of that environmental cost?
Well, the environmental cost, because, you know, to build an electric vehicle requires 4 times the minerals and materials that to build an ordinary combustion, a petrol engine. So up front, see, this is the problem. You know, over the lifespan, the energy use is better. So it's a battery is better than, you know, petrol, using it for 10. But to make the battery requires basically destroying the Andes, you know, and poisoning the water of the Chilean farmers because most of the lithium mining is, you know, in Chile and places like that. And to get the coltan for the phones, we have to kill the Western lowland gorillas, because most of the coltan in the batteries and the electronics are found in the Republic of Congo. So, you know, to build our world, we'll destroy the world. To build the digital world, we'll destroy the physical world. I mean, this is not a joke. This is not, this, you know, why? And the reason we're going on this path is because there's a lot of greedy people that just want to become trillionaires. And they're not happy being billionaires. They want to be trillionaires. You know, that's really why we're letting a tiny elite, the vast majority of CO2 comes from the rich 10% of the world.
But the irony is, and this brings me back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is that most of us believe that electric cars are the solution. We're doing the right thing. We're doing the right thing by using email, by communicating via webinar. So unless that education really starts to kind of be driven home, there won't be the change necessary. And if we are talking about that education, and just to end now, Gerry, what would be, because we often feel powerless. So as individuals, as these younger generations listening now, what would be your top 3 tips just to try and be a better digital citizen, let's say? What would you say? Just do these things. And ultimately that will make a difference if we all do that.
Well, every time you create, delete. So every time you want to send an email, try and delete an email. You know, every time you go into a folder to get something, delete something in that folder. You try and get into your daily habits to remove as much as create, you know, so that, you know, there's a process by which you begin to clean up after yourself. Like we do that at the kitchen table. We teach our kids to clean up after themselves. We never teach our kids to clean up after themselves in digital. Don't let it become 5,000 photos on your phone, because you're never going to look after them. So basically delete, you know, as much as you create in the process. Less digital, burn your own energy. You know, get out, get walking, get cycling in the process. If you've got a choice and you can do it yourself, do it yourself. You know, try and remove. We are all, I'm an addict to this in the process as well. But, you know, burn your own energy. Cycling is 1,000,000 times better than electric cars in the process, you know, walking, etc. So get out, get talking, physical interaction. You're not killing the planet, you know, or you're doing much less. If you're playing a sport, get out into the world. You're doing much less damage than you're doing online in the process. So more becoming physical again, getting back into nature, you know, and basically looking after, hold on to your stuff. These digital devices, that's the term, hold on to these devices. They create an awful lot of damage to make. So you want to keep them for as long as possible. You know, so you hold on, make it, we should really be keeping phones for 10 years and laptops for 20 years. But the longer you can hold on to your device, the more you are spreading that the negative impact of the material impact in the process. So hold on to your device. Be proud of an old device. You're really doing something good for the planet.
Fantastic. I have just loved this conversation. So what it was, get out, get on your bike, walk when you can, delete, and hold on to your old devices. These are just a few things we can all do. And, you know, you can follow Gerry McGOVERN. You're quite active on Twitter, I have to say. But, you know, so much great advice there. It's been fantastic talking to you. And the conversation can continue, because I shall be following what you're up to.
Well, thank you, Isabel. It was a real pleasure talking to you too. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye now. Thank you.